Welcome! Today, I want to go through the process when it comes to commission work with you, start to finish. And luckily, I can show you this process with an actual piece that was commissioned to me by a fan of my art. In this video, I also snuck in some of my methods of madness when it comes to rendering out these types of characters, as well as helpful tips to make your workflow a little bit more efficient. Shout out to Steve if you're watching. This one has been really enjoyable to create, and I hope you liked how it turned out as much as I did. This piece is Ancient Vampire God. Let's go. Right, so the first thing I like to do, I like to ask the client if they have a Word document, a description of what the character looks like, as well as any visual aids on the idea they want this character to look like. And then I'll even ask if they have like a backstory they could provide me, or some sort of story that goes with this character, their role in the campaign, their personality, perhaps. It just gives me a better sense of how to present this character, or rather create this character. Next, I'll just surf the internet, find some reference pieces, whether that would be type of weapons, clothing, armor, etc. Then after doing that, I got a pretty good idea of how I want to draw up these 3 rough drafts. Here they are. And let them choose which one they like the best. In this case, we're going with the bottom one. Awesome. Let's sketch them out. So the first thing I do is I will make a basic anatomy drawing. Your basic shapes, squares, ovals, things like that. And then I add a new layer, and I draw on top of that, adding the clothing, muscles, facial expressions or features. Nothing too crazy, nothing too detailed, just kind of a general guideline. I do like to stick with realistic proportions for my anatomy. There are cases where I will exaggerate certain body parts, that being hands, head, if it's going to give visual appeal to the overall piece. I am perfectly happy sacrificing a little bit of realism for visually appealing art. And then I move into the blocking. I'll take a mid-tone, and then I will just make a silhouette of the entire figure. And then from there, I'll take some layers, I'll clip them into that silhouette, and I will block in certain parts of the figure, whether that be clothing, jewelry. And here's a reference piece that the client has sent to me. He wants it to overall kind of look like that, right? Scary, a lot of teeth. I think this is really cool. And so I just use this. I'll even use the colors in this as well to give them that skin tone that you see. But then when I kind of have like a good feel of how I want this to be laid out, I will start to go in then and use darker values of that color for the skin, making the shadows, the highlights. And then from there, kind of just start detailing it out a bit. With all my pieces, I like to get the face pretty much rendered out to a satisfactory point. I feel more comfortable when I see the face, I guess. When I get the face good, the whole rest of the piece just kind of flows in. And as you'll see, I make tweaks along the way throughout the whole process. That line art isn't set in stone, it's more like a guideline. And then I'll just continue to render out top to bottom. So let's say I start on the face. I typically will focus more on the skin, and then I'll move on to the next block, which would be the blocked in torn sleeve cloak. Oh, real quick. So when rendering out skin and muscles, it's very important to use your light values. It defines both the light areas and the shadows. As you can see between the bicep brachialis and tricep, the lack of values, it gives it a cut in the muscle. That definition. The higher the value that meets those shadow areas, the more definition you'll get, higher contrast. So once I have the muscles in, I'll take another sweep with a value on low opacity to give it a skin look like it's wrapped all up, kind of unifying everything. And then I'll go back in and add higher values or shadow areas if needed. Makes sense? Okay, cool. So now I continue to render the skin and his hooded shirt, using the same principles with the light and dark values. I want the main light source to cast down on him, as if there was a crack in the ceiling allowing light to shine down. So as I render and feel it out, I keep that in mind. What I also did was lower the saturation of his clothes to give them more of a subtle tone versus a cartoony look, since I want him to be taken more seriously. I think the light casting down on him will contribute to that as well. Give more of a dramatic look as he walks towards you. I want to go into the very interesting and creative backstory Steve had provided me for the vampire god Drin. Here it is. There was a war between gods. One had died in this war, and his spirit was split into 4 beings. One of those beings was Drin, the first vampire. The only vampire to be born, not made, which is why he looks less human. Drin was betrayed by one of his first turn and sealed away. He was put in a grand casket that removed all of his blood. The blood was stored in 4 vats, and the husk, Drin, stayed in the casket, so he was in a permanent sleep until released. He can turn into a blood mist or a pool of blood. His Sith has his blood running through it. No one can pick it up but him, like the same concept of Thor's hammer. In the campaign, he gets released by the party, and he teams up with them to take down the vampire that betrayed him. If you're watching this, Steve, I'd love to hear how it turned out. When reading this backstory, I had mental images of a giant casket sealed with ruins and chains, along with old vats nearby full of blood, with a thick layer of dust blanketed atop. You gotta let me know how that turns out. And one of the biggest reasons I love TTRPGs and that genre is the creativity that comes from it. The fantasy worlds molded, the encounters, the players' characters that are created. Very interesting stuff. Another little trick I'll share with you is how to remember what layer filters and colors you used and can refer back to when you want to use them again. What do I mean? Well, I use divide or lighten on layers that I want different effects on, either be glowing, light, etc. In most cases when I use these, I forget to write them down, so when I want to reuse them, I have to go back to that original layer, I have to set it to normal again, grab that color, and set the layer back to the filter. And that can get very time consuming. So what I started to do is when I used a layer effect that I liked, I would set it back to normal, and then off to the side, I would paint in that color, and then abbreviate the filter. Just makes the workflow a little bit easier. And here I use a reference for the scythe. It's mostly for grabbing some colors. And then once I have a general color applied, or colors applied, I start to form them and shape them and add those light and dark values to render it. At this point, he seems like he's missing some more finer details, so I go onto another level of detail and add some red metal coins strapped to his bracers. Give the piece a little bit more to look at and interest. When I'm satisfied of how the piece looks when it's all rendered out, I go back and do touch-ups, tweaks here and there. Then I'll slap on that signature and resend it to the client for review. I will go back if needed and polish up or update anything. But that is, in a nutshell, my process when it comes to commissions. I like to keep my clients in the loop and share the progress with them when I can, so we are on the same page every step of the way. That was Agent Vampire God. Hope you enjoyed watching and got something out of it, whether it being some new tricks or some inspiration. And if you're like me and love to sit down and relax and watch artists do their thing in real time, a visual study I like to call it, link above is the full process. Thanks so much for watching, and till next time.